Recurrence. All the ideas of this work can and sometimes do act as shocks. Ideas are very powerful, far more so than anything visible and material. Ideas, as we've seen, can dominate entire nations or timestamp eras. We cannot see an idea, however we can feel its effect, and therein lies the key, which is feeling. P.D. Ouspensky compared ideas with very powerful mechanisms, which if handled incorrectly could be very dangerous. To feel all the ideas of this work is to transform our understanding. For example, the idea that we are not one but many different I's can transform one's understanding of oneself, and of all other people too. In the same way, ideas about time can change our outlook on life as we have known it up until now. Taking then the idea of recurrence. It is impossible to understand the concept unless an idea of the fourth dimension of time is grasped. So what then is the fourth dimension? We are in the three dimensions of space, length, breadth, and height, therefore consider these dimensions for a moment. The movement of a point which has no dimensions generates a line is one-dimensional. Living on that line, it would be impossible to conceive how any movement at right angles to it would be possible. The movement of a line generates a plenary surface, which is two-dimensional. The movement of a plane generates a solid, this is three-dimensional. We have difficulty conceiving what movement a solid could make to generate a higher dimensional figure of itself, therefore let's take our own lives as lines, in the fourth dimension. According to the idea of recurrence, the moment of death is the moment of birth. We can see here that it would be necessary to bend the line to form a circle, so that the 2 points that we refer to as birth and death practically meet one another. Here a triangle is usually drawn to indicate that something happens between death and birth. A person is born in the same part of time again and again, which is impossible to understand unless one can conceive the reality of the fourth and fifth dimensions. Time lives, because it's dynamic, we exist within living time, and each of our lives is fixed in some part of that living time, hence this particular segment is our time. You've heard the expression, this is their time no more. If we do not change anything in ourselves, then everything will be the same again, like Groundhog Day. If essence remains unchanged, it is born again into the same part of time, and once more attracts to itself the same life, surrounds itself with the same personality, the same influences, the same inclinations, the same desires, the same wants and needs defining its outcomes. Essence is the indestructible part of us. We know that inner growth means a new growth of essence, and we know that essence cannot grow unless personality is rendered passive, particularly certain parts of personality and hence certain projections. Esotericism can change the relationship of personality and essence. Life keeps personality active, and the gradual effect of esotericism is to make personality passive. This is why an individual should work on themselves. If we are willing to sacrifice certain aspects of our personality, if we withhold life force from certain signature traits, then it becomes possible for essence to begin to grow. If essence grows, then once it is reborn, it will not attract the same life cycles. Change of being necessarily means a change in the life that we live, because our being attracts our life. If there is a development of essence, there will not only be a change in the life that we lead, but there will also be recollection, a touch of déjà vu. A person may recall what to do at some difficult moment, then they remember they made some mistake. We often attribute these feelings to our guardian angel, or some force outside of us, however it emerges from within, from essence. Since our being is composed of different parts, some of which are more awake and others rather asleep, we realize that we could represent our lives as a number of parallel lines drawn on a sheet of paper, like telegraph wires on a pole, or railroad tracks across a freight yard. Supposing we are negative, then we'd be on a lower wire. Through self-remembering we may ascend to a wire higher up. By taking everything as heavily as possible, we travel along the lowest, the worst wire available to us. Through non-identifying and remembering ourselves, we get onto a higher, and a better wire. Although all these wires lie as it were, close together, there are differences between them. One may encounter something on one wire which does not exist on another. For example, we may encounter this work on one of those lines, yet miss it entirely on a lower one. All of our eyes are not on the same level, and we cannot meet some of them, say on the lowest level, because they do not live there. We have many different kinds of memory, and each eye has its own memory. Memory is our relation to the fourth dimension, which extends both into the future and into the past. Someone may remember the future, which is not so extraordinary if we realize that we have lived many lifelines before. This work stresses the importance of remembering, because we need to remember those moments of understanding that we've already had. We must remember that we are in this work. We must remember our aim, and we must remember ourselves. We must remember to isolate ourselves internally from life, and not to let its events crush us. We shouldn't be overwhelmed, and must remember to practice non-identifying whenever we find that we are becoming identified. There is a chance that some change may take place if we do not identify as much, and do so continually. By remembering to observe identifying in ourselves, then practicing non-identifying, we come under new influences. The objective obviously is to reach those new influences, which can heal us and give a new and different life, with diverse outcomes. If there were no other influences available to us, and if visible life on earth were all that exists, if there were no ray of creation, then there would be no work, and no esoteric teaching, then everything would be without hope. Everything would be fixed and mechanical as described in 19th century positivist philosophy. No one could change themselves. The shock at point 6 is of different kinds, and in a general sense, the ideas of this work and the practice of it give just that shock. For example, the idea that we actually recur is a shock when it is emotionally perceived, as it changes our relationship both to the present and to the past. It makes us see our lives in a new way. If we can see our life in a new way, then that is a shock. What is it a shock against? It is a shock against the way that we were taking life previously. If we take our lives in the same way always, then we become fixated and crystallize around the wrong points. To loosen us from this grip, a shock is necessary. We all know how difficult it is to change people's ideas, and that it's a sign of emotional intelligence to be able to grasp new ideas. This work is therefore to make everyone think, because all the ideas of this work can act as shocks, if we think about them for ourselves. The ideas will lift us up to a different level. They will shake us out of the dullness and stupidity of small eyes that direct our lives all of the time. We understand that a vision could be thought of as a shock. A person acquires new vision. They see light where they did not see it before, and see everything from a new perspective. Through this vision they receive a shock. It's a shock to their old way of seeing things. They are shaken out of themselves, and if you are shaken out of yourself, then you are being given a shock. A shock has to awaken us from the deep sleep in which we live our daily lives. We go to sleep instantly, we get up and sleep more deeply than in our beds. Not only do the ideas of this work give us a shock when they are understood and assimilated into our minds, but they can actually transform us. The shock of being awakened is accompanied by the transformation of oneself. The shock of spring on a seed awakens it to a new life, which at the same time transforms it. The seed is shaken out of itself. Have you ever been shaken out of yourself, off the basis upon which you rest? If so, then you'd understand what a shock is. However, a shock is not necessarily a sudden thing. It may unfold over a long, very long period, like a ferment which slowly changes the grape into wine. The answer to the question then as to whether the idea of time can be connected with the shock at point 6 is, indeed, yes, it can. However, it will only be a shock if we try to understand what it means, then often reflect upon the idea of recurrence, about how we will tend to turn on the wheel of our own lives, unless we change something in ourselves. What then do we have to do in order to change ourselves, and to change our lives in such a way? This work is about teaching us what we have to do every day, and every moment of our lives. Each center, and each part of a center has its own memory. The important thing to understand is that memory is not one and the same thing, as memory is our relationship to the fourth dimension. It is our relationship to the time allotted us. We can move in memory, into the past, without moving from our seats. This relationship to the past is certainly defective, as we'd all agree. However, underlying our personal memory there is a deeper memory, to which we rarely have access, if at all. In this deeper memory everything is present, everything we said or did or saw and experienced. Certain smells can trigger memories stored for us in deep emotion. This is the book of our life that is opened at death. We have memory in essence, personality is destroyed at death, however essence returns. We have therefore a chance of remembering when we recur, when we incarnate into matter, only if essence records anything at all. Whatever we do genuinely, with feeling, touches essence, and essence will remember it upon our return. This is one reason why genius or talent often shows itself very early in life. In recurrence, everything comes earlier, that is, anything that is in any way genuinely undertaken. Some musicians and other individuals of renowned genius have begun to remember very early on in their lives. Real memory is not connected in the same way as personal memory. For example, all moments of genuine understanding in this work will be connected together. They will not lie mixed up with other memories in sequence or mixed up with dates. Memories of the same emotional quality tend to connect themselves. This memory of three-dimensional past time, of day-by-day events, is different from emotional memory. In other words, our relationship to the fourth dimension is very different. A person may have a very poor time sequence memory, yet possess a robust emotional memory, and vice versa. The question has then been asked, how can we be reborn in the same part of time, as our parents will not be there? Which is a misconception, as our parents are in our allotted time. Everything is there in time, and everything is recurring in our times. We are always born of the same parents, in the same house, in the same street, in the same neighborhood of the same town. The difficulty is to conceive with our sense-based minds what higher dimensions are like. It is in fact mostly impossible. We tend to think of time as a line, our personal timeline. However, there are really three dimensions of time, so that the line becomes a plane, the fabric of time, and that plane in turn becomes a solid, the body of time. In this solid of time everything exists, and everything is turning on cogs or gears, both large and small. At the same time there is some general change taking place in the whole time solid. To put this in our ordinary language, some things are ascending, some things are descending, and some things are remaining stationary within that time body, which is our soul, or book of life. In taking the idea of recurrence, we have to assess its component parts. We might pick out one wheel from the mechanism for our understanding, and conceive in some way that this wheel is made of an elastic substance that is capable of stretching a little, or of being somewhat compressed. We cannot choose different parents, different siblings, or different neighbors. We can't be born in a different culture or geographic location, because quite simply we cannot, for we fall under the laws of recurrence. We are born into the same part of time as before, and our parents are there. It is only when we come to consider reincarnation that this question can arise, as reincarnation is quite different from recurrence and involves the transmigration of souls. In recurrence one is born into the same part of time through the same parents. In reincarnation we are not born into the same part of time. However, reincarnation is out of the question for an everyday individual or layperson at our level of being, and a much higher development is necessary for that to occur. An individual must have reached the end of their life cycle and be joined together in a certain way internally through fusion, before they can be able to pass into another segment of time. Otherwise they'd simply be torn apart, and broken down or shattered into their various component parts, lacking any sort of cohesion and unity of purpose. They'd be out of sorts and utterly lost, just as you would if you were transported in your sleep and then suddenly dropped on a park bench in a foreign city halfway across the world. Then expected to function like anyone else, get a job and know all the local customs, traditions, and laws. It simply wouldn't be you anymore, such as you know or remember yourself. If we come under the influence of the idea of recurrence, then the whole of our concept of the past changes, when we realize that it's actually the future which changes the past for us. It is said that a great struggle is going to take place in this world between spiritual people who believe in some form of afterlife, and scientists who believe only in this life. The concept of recurrence satisfies both of these ideologies. When we see that our past actually lies in front of us, then all thoughts about the past become useful to this work.